so let's hope it happens. We've got a lot of interesting questions today. He has antisocial personality disorder, and he creates educational content on his disorder, and he hosts an account with his partner, and they share a bunch of things. Woohoo, he's logged on. Let's see if we can get Jake on here. I'm accepting his request. It happened yet again. Let me see. Yeah, I accept it and nothing happens. Oh my God.
Hey.
I can't believe it. Hey, Jake.
Hi, you're all right.
Okay, cool. Finally it happened. Like I said, 3 times the charm. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Yourself?
Now I'm good. I'm used to it, I'm glad you liked the questions. I'm so glad that you accepted this conversation. I realized later on that your partner has borderline personality disorder, and that's also something that we deal with on my profile. And I thought, well, damn, if I had known that, we could have all talked. But thank you very much for being available and for your content.
No worries. Well, my partner is actually here, by the way. So if you did
Hello,
want to say
hello,
anything to her,
hello, cool.
the room. So, but yeah, just to clarify as well. I've said this before on other podcasts, but so she suffers with borderline, but I also suffer with traits of borderline as well. On top of this, so I just wanted to clarify that as well. I've said it on a few other podcasts, but I just thought I'd clear it up here as well. So yeah, I can answer some of those things as well if need be.
Awesome. Okay. Well, the first thing is tell us a little bit about yourself, like anything that you think is relevant that you want to start out with, that you would want people to know about yourself and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so obviously I'm Jake, run Antisocial Theatre with my partner Emily. We started back in 2019, so a little bit before the pandemic hit, obviously. And it started as a university project to create our own theatre company. So I'm an actor, so that's where it all began, basically. And the idea was to raise awareness about controversial mental health topics, but through the medium of art, specifically theatre. So I got together with a couple of other peers, and we wrote a script. If you're familiar with Clockwork Orange,
Yeah.
It was sort of a modernized version of Clockwork Orange. It was set in London, and we were trying to sort of talk about some of the experiences with mental health through that sort of modern take on Clockwork Orange. But unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we had to go digital, which is where you see it today with all the content that we post today. But we still try to keep that sort of creative element to it as much as we can. So it's sort of, I still like to say antisocial theatre because it still has a theatrical element to it. But that is basically me and Emily in a nutshell. Okay,
that's really awesome. And I wonder if this creative process has been something that has helped with your mental health as well. If it's something that helps you guys, like, have a better quality of life. Would you say that it is, this work that you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. For me specifically, a lot of the darker thoughts and symptoms that come out of ASPD or antisocial personality disorder, the way that I cope with it without engaging in criminal activity is through art, is through the medium of art. And I feel uninhibited when I'm doing artwork or I'm writing a script. I can be as dark as I want to be, and I can insinuate anything when it comes to violence. There's no sort of cap on art, and I like that freedom to be able to sort of express the darkest parts of myself, but through a medium that is more accepted in the public eye. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely. I feel there's, art is a way to express those parts of yourself that you can't otherwise express, or you don't know how to maybe articulate in another way. And so that kind of relieves some pressure off of that part of your psyche. You don't have to suffer from the consequences of having that energy inside of you in the same way, right?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, that is, summed it up pretty nicely there. Yeah.
For sure, I feel the same thing. And I noticed that you guys at some point somewhere on in your post you talked about I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Is that what you do? Okay, cool. So I'm involved in sports, always have been as well. Great for aggression, right? And I wanted to know about your experience with sports and if this is something that you feel also helps you manage your symptoms.
Absolutely. Again, great question. Yeah, the thing is with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, originally it started off as full contact MMA. I wanted to do a charity fight. In England, we get like charity fights. I'm sure you get it everywhere, but it's like you get like 30 days or something free training, or 8 weeks, free training. And at the end of the 8 weeks, you get matched with another person who you've trained with, and you get to fight in like in a stadium with like hundreds of people watching. You get your own walkout music. It's basically like the real deal. So I threw myself into that. I did the fight. I won, obviously. And I fell in love with the grappling element of it, the jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
Being able to control another person, another human being, but which makes sense, of course. But it's legal violence, but there's a more it's sort of like chess. It's not just like mindless violence like you would think watching people on telly punch each other or anything. It's a lot more graceful, and it's quite a good metaphor for life, actually, getting yourself out of uncomfortable positions and being comfortable being uncomfortable. So yeah, and with ASPD, with the violent thoughts and the aggression, you haven't got room to be aggressive in jiu-jitsu. If you are, you lose pretty quickly. You get choked out, or someone might snap your arm. Like, it's very like real consequences, and it's again a good metaphor for people like me that you can't just go out and do all these things because there is real world consequences. And I think it helped teach me that, but in a healthy way. So I'm very blessed to get involved with jiu-jitsu and sport in general, to be honest.
First of all, fascinating the whole thing about the aspect of controlling another person's body and that summation of your antisocial adaptation. Pretty cool, right? Because I think that's one path for healing, maybe a type of sublimation that makes sense to you and that keeps you aligned with whatever it is that you're trying to develop in your life. And I was going to say something else, but I forgot. Oh yeah, and do you feel that? Well, I guess you expressed something in the way of like. I imagine that for you to win, you have to train, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So there has to be discipline, and you can't just make up a story about why you're not as good as you would like to be because you know that you were drinking or you weren't, sleeping or you weren't training, all of that stuff, those consequences, right, that you talked about. So it's like a reality check in a way that kind of keeps you in line and gives you a space to put all of that energy, but keeps you kind of connected to, like you said, the consequences, reality, right? Would you say it's something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Like, again, when you're in a cage, stood across from someone whose sole goal is to hurt you to the point where you say, "I can't take it anymore," it is a reality check. It also heightened a lot of my insecurities. Again, this is where the BPD traits come in, and this is great timing because I'm actually doing a video this weekend about this subject. So this sort of my borderline trait sort of contradicts my ASPD traits at certain times. And one thing I struggle with a lot is hypervigilance. So because I was subjected to a lot of physical violence as a child, it makes me nervous to think about having to get into that vulnerable position again. So that's another reason that I did it, is to purposely almost like sort of let my ASPD take over and be like, no, you're going to be violent and you're going to enjoy it, and it's going to destroy that the childhood anxiety and fear. So that's another reason that I did it. I wanted to let go of that vulnerability that BPD sort of latches on and makes you feel. So yeah, reality check in that sense as well.
Okay, first of all, let me pause and just ask everybody if my connection is okay, because for me it's not that good and I'm thinking about switching the connection. Can you guys give me some feedback? Is it okay for you, Jake?
Yeah, you're fine for me, yeah.
Really? Okay, well, can somebody else give me feedback? But I guess if it's okay for Jake, then maybe it's just...
There we go.
I can
you both.
hear you both?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, whatever. Well, then I guess that was just temporary.
Mm.
You say a lot of fascinating things that I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I have an aspect I realized of my personality where if I feel scared of something, I kind of like go there and I'm like, well, I'm gonna do it now. Because then it's like, you can't hurt me anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's get to the questions, if you don't mind. And you just answer whatever you want to answer. And if you want to talk about whatever, then we just talk about whatever. Let me get those questions.
Sure.
Okay. Your stories, like how did you get diagnosed? How did that go down? Those boring things that you have to repeat over and over. Brazil will thank you.
Okay. So with the diagnosis, it actually came quite late. I've been in and out of therapy probably since I was around 13. I was sort of talking about things that probably weren't normal to most people when I was a lot younger, which actually relates to a question you've got later about forethought. I'd say probably said things that I thought was normal but weren't. And it was about like homicidal thoughts and feelings that I was getting, and you know, it was just sort of, I had to tell somebody about it. I was like, and this isn't. I was like, it's almost like I know it's not normal, but it doesn't feel that, you know, it doesn't feel horrible for me to experience it. But I understand that I probably shouldn't be experiencing it. So I ended up talking to somebody. And it just sort of went from there. I was in and out of, so it wasn't really like psychiatry. It was more like therapy, like counselling, like really base level, low, just sort of talking to someone who's like an adult, and it just sort of went from there. And I got passed from multiple different organisations and people who didn't really know what to do or what to say. And then I moved away from where I used to live. I grew up in a place called Blackpool in the UK, which is a seaside town. And then I moved to a place called Yorkshire. For the people watching, I've seen a few English people, they'll know Yorkshire. And that's where I lived. Back in 2009, I moved, and that's where I lived most of this period of the horrible things that happened and my diagnosis and stuff. So I was in and out of therapy. I went to a organisation called CAMS. So that's Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services in the UK, they are renowned for being rubbish at their job, and making people feel inferior, and that they don't really care about you. A lot of people who've been to CAMS may or may not have experienced that. And they just seemed to want to deem my threat level the entire time I was talking to them. I think the second or third week I was talking to them, they put me in front of a forensic psychiatrist who literally said, word for word, I am here to deem your threat level. That's exactly what they said to me. And I was like really young, and I was like, what? I'm just trying to talk to these people about how I feel. Oh. And then they're trying to tell me I'm, big and scary. So I stopped therapy. I completely left, and I didn't have any sort of contact with therapy or counselling for years. Fast forward all the way to 2020. Sort of just before the pandemic hit, or maybe during, I can't remember actually, but it was definitely 2020 because I've got the records. I had an assessment at a proper clinic with a clinical psychiatrist, and I had like a 2-hour talk with this woman, and she eventually diagnosed me with antisocial personality disorder with borderline traits. I finally got that letter. I finally got it in writing in front of me. This is what you have. This is what we spoke about. This is maybe why you feel that way. Blah, 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 blah. And obviously back in 2019 when I started antisocial. I knew I already had a personality disorder, and I already knew that it was most likely antisocial because I'd done a lot of research. I don't like to just say, oh yeah, that sounds like me, that's what I've got. No, it took a lot of research. I did a lot of academic research. I actually did my dissertation, my university dissertation. I managed to talk about personality disorders in that, so I actually got to do some academic research on ASPD as well. And getting that diagnosis just sort of validated how I already thought and validated all my experiences, because you go through like an imposter syndrome sort of thing when you sort of go through that. Am I making this up? Is this real? Am I putting this on a bit? And then when the things that I was saying, which was normal to me, people were looking at me with like a grimace, almost like, that's not normal to think that way, or to, you shouldn't, normal people don't do that, don't do those things. So yeah, that's the story. And obviously I got here to now, and I became even more solidified in my knowledge, my experience. People started reaching out to me and saying they feel the same, or, oh my God, like, thank you for talking about this. People don't usually talk about this, and people don't usually talk about it with their face either. Like, sure. A lot of people, they hide behind a sort of, but I get that though. I just want to say for everyone watching, I get that. I understand, because the stigma that comes with it, it can have real world effects. Like, it can affect you getting a job, relationships, anything. So I get it, but I got to a point where I didn't care anymore, and I felt like I had a responsibility to put my face to the, to make it, you have to stand out in this world, and that's how I decided to do it. So that's the story up to now, basically.
Oh, that's great. And I have to tell you, as someone who studies this, and I deal with people who came from families where there was a narcissistic or antisocial or cluster B generally parent, an untreated, unaware parent, right? And all of the psychological issues. And I deal with the adult children of these family systems. And so you're saying so many important things. Like, you're young and you're just trying to talk to people, and you automatically assume that the people that are supposed to help you are the ones to talk to. Mm. And, and obviously you don't get someone who can just listen to you and try to understand your point of view. I really believe that if people with cluster B tendencies or any sort of disorder, that's already developing when they're teenagers, I really believe it makes a humongous difference to have safe ports with people who, you may have all these dark thoughts, and the person just looked at you, oh yeah, well, you're a human being with dark thoughts. Let's talk about that. But, human beings have dark thoughts. I think that probably makes a difference. And also, I would like to say that as someone who studies this stuff, and I try to, like you, study the literature, the academic stuff, but most of all, I like listening to people and studying the content that you guys make, because it really is like the people who have these disorders are creating some, if not the best content on the internet, really, very small accounts, but very rich content that make this information very accessible and like humanizing, right? Because I think we can all agree that it's probably better that everybody just be able to get support and non-stigmatizing information for whatever they're treating, period.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, you make a good point about it's like all the accounts tend to be quite small when they're talking about cluster B personality disorders and those kind of things, like you mentioned, obviously, like narcissistic personality disorder, anything with those, big, heavy, stigmatized names. People will switch on but they'll only switch on to come and vilify those people, with no understanding of the whole picture of what it entails, and how it manifests in the real world as well. That's something I like to talk about, is how these symptoms manifest in the real world. For example, like in the DSM-5, it for the ASPD, it talks about like being manipulative or like being deceitful. And someone will just read that and take it at face value and picture some sort of pantomime villain like at every constant turn. I was like, no, it's a lot more, you know, in more average settings than that, like with friends, with family, at work, things that you probably don't even know it's happening half of the time. Like, and it's so ingrained in these people's minds that it's just a part of who they are, and you can't always identify it. You know, and the whole sort of notion that anybody that has a cluster B personality disorder is automatically going to punch you in the face or beat you up or steal from you or be abusive, like that, it's just not correct. I mean, I will be the first person to say, as I always do, that living with things like ASPD, it's dark, it's scary, and it's a really sort of soul-sucking place to be a lot of the time when you're flaring up with your symptoms and things like that. So I will be the first to say that it is dark, it can be abusive, don't get me wrong, but just having the disorder point blank does not make someone a monster or evil. And I feel like what we're doing among other accounts, there's many, you know, other accounts as well. I think it's really important to hear from the people who've got it and live with it, and you know, and it's people all over the world as well. It's not just me. It's people in, you know, I speak to people in Germany, in America. Like there's people everywhere suffering with these things. It's universal. So, and it's important to get perspective from everybody else that's on the spectrum. And when I say spectrum, it ranges in levels of its severity. You know, so someone might be manipulative or aggressive, and they are really aggressive, you know, or outward, meaning like maliciously manipulative. And some people maybe not so much. You know, it's not as cut and dry and as black and white as the diagnostic criteria makes you believe, and that's why pages like us need to exist. That's why.
Absolutely, pages like yours absolutely need to exist. It has enriched the experience of us who study, you know, these disorders and stuff. And honestly, I just, you know, I consume all of your content, and you guys say some things that I'm like, oh, I identify with that. And, you know, I just have different defenses for whatever reason, maybe because I'm autistic. So my way of dealing with the world is like, I do not exist in outer reality. I am in my world, you know, and that's it. I dealt with reality, you know, maybe that's just the thing. Yeah, absolutely. And also I think when there's this weird dichotomy where there's the good people and the bad people, people don't realize that many of my clients who come from narcissistic family systems and antisocial family systems, they don't understand that they are cluster B, right? They're unaware. And like, you're not going to want to understand that if when you go online, there's only information that doesn't invite you to explore, you know, your adaptations further and do something useful with them, you know, something that can actually give you better quality of life. So there's that practical aspect of humanizing it and destigmatizing it, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. You're absolutely right. A lot of people, there's this talk as well on social media, especially, where people think that if you have some sort of disorder, that you cannot be aware of it. Like, I don't understand it. Like, I think I said it on a post ages ago, like, people like us recognize that we're different from everybody else, and we've known since we were children that we're not the same. So of course we know something's wrong. Well, you know, something's not right, something doesn't align with how society is meant to be. So I think we're very fully aware, and you're absolutely right. When people do become aware that there's something not quite right, or they identify with something that they feel like is dark, and they go on the internet and they find all these buzzwords: narcissist, sociopath, psychopath, serial killer, and they're often used synonymously, of course. And it makes people who do want to talk about it not want to talk about it. So then that helps add to the myth that people with ASPD, for example, don't want to seek therapy. And it's like they don't want to seek therapy because as soon as they say something, they're going to be vilified from the get-go. That's why they don't want to talk about it. So, and that's another reason I feel like I have to put a face to what we do. So you're talking to a human being with a, you know, with a life and with real life consequences. So yeah, it's a shame that that's what's out there for the majority.
Yeah, but soon I think this will become more mainstream, and then everyone will slowly adapt to a different type of terminology and, you know, approach. Let's hope anyway.
Yeah.
And let's hope. Right. I do think that, you know, things like this, because when I started doing these conversations with cluster Bs, people were like, what are you doing? You're aligning with the devil. And I'm like, come on, guys. You know, this sort of weird response. And I'm like, come on, guys. The rational thing to do, because I have strong borderline traits myself. I'm not going to be like, you know, oh, I'm on this end of the spectrum because I am pure. That's not very healthy for me, my relationships, and the world, you know. So let's just create this an environment where we can have conversations. But now, even just like a few interviews in, I think people are already different. You know, the way that people are interacting, at least with my content specifically, it's already different. And people are getting in touch and saying, oh yeah, I'm antisocial, or oh yeah, I'm a narcissist, and they didn't feel comfortable, you know, a few years back. And that's because we can bring the levity to the subject, so people can feel that and be like, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. Right?
Exactly. Somebody's just said in the comments, and I agree with, cluster B terminology has just become pop culture words. Like, I agree, like these, again, the buzzwords, you know, like people don't know what, you know, like for example, narcissist is another term that's associated with cluster B that gets really it just gets thrown out at any given moment. Like if somebody says something you don't like, they said that because they're a narcissist. Maybe they said it because they just don't like you, or they don't like what you said, or they don't align with what you said. Human beings disagree with each other, you know, and people, not everyone's, I think it's just the way people's minds jump to that conclusion, and they all of a sudden know so much about a disorder that they can't even categorize. They can't even tell you what criteria it's marked against because they don't research it. They just hear those words, and human beings, obviously, they associate with the negative before they hit the positive, so they just jump on it. Yeah, narcissist, that's what it means, you know. Sociopath, psychopath, that's what it means. Yeah, it's just, I just think that person is right. Dissociation, mania, yeah. Again, people just use these terms so loosely without knowing the meaning of them, and it contributes to the stigma. Even though some people say things without a malicious intent, but they're adding to the stigma, and they're adding to the issue. So that's why, like, it's not sexy to be a cluster B online. It's not something that gets millions of views unless something really bad's happened. Like, I've been on a few podcasts recently, and I noticed that the episodes that had anxiety or depression or eating disorders or anything along those lines, that was more self-harm based, that gets so many views and so much sympathy, and it blows up. But as soon as you put antisocial personality disorder, or some people use the buzzwords interview with a sociopath, interview with a narcissist, you know, people are like, they're not bothered about supporting those people. Although they'll only listen because they're waiting to hear something that, you know, confirms their bias. And then when they don't hear that, and they hear people with these disorders talking as if they're real humans, because they are, they're like, oh, and they switch off, and it doesn't get as much traction as it should. So hopefully it does, like you said earlier, hopefully it does, you know, become more of mainstream to talk about these things. But, you know, we are the people pioneering that change, hopefully. So we could be part of history.
Yay, let's hope. And that's the thing, you know, like from when I started my YouTube channel, I thought I'm not going to ever call narcissists, because that's what I dealt with initially, just, you know, demons or stuff like that. because that makes no sense. Particularly because if I'm teaching people that they can connect to their own inner compass and like they can, you know, distance themselves from a toxic relationship and they can work on themselves and all of that, I'm not going to be like, there's this force out there that can destroy you at any moment. I'm not going to be teaching people that other people, because they have personality disorders, they need to have this power over us. Why? How does that make sense? Go do your therapy, you know, do what you need to do for your life. So I've always tried to not be overtly stigmatizing, but even I have to rewrite my posts as I watch your guys' content and read your content, because there are things that are just so ingrained, even if you try to be neutral about it, that until you see the other person expressing it to you in a way that you can understand, you don't understand that you were doing something in a way that's not that conducive to everybody's healing, you know? So that's what I mean. So when you guys explain things in a very clear way, I'm like, oh, I have to change this. At the same time, I can't gaslight people who are dealing with anyone who has an abusive personality when we're dealing with that, and be like, you know, the fact that there are these people talking about their processes on this path, that's one thing. That's not necessarily the person that you're dealing with. You need to deal with what you're dealing with here, and you need to be lucid about this, and we cannot save other people. Everybody needs to save themselves, so we can have these two conversations. But I'm not telling you to stay in an abusive relationship. And oftentimes people believe that when I, for example, do these interviews, that's what I'm trying to say. You know, you have to stay in an abusive relationship, and there's like no connection between the two things. I'm telling people to heal themselves, to work on themselves and have human conversations. And I'm sure people identify with stuff that you're saying, you know, I'm absolutely sure of it. So they'll feel more comfortable coming out and saying that.
Yeah. I mean, like, when it comes to the toxic relationship thing, again, like, the reality is it happens so much. Like cluster B disorders are often birthed from trauma. Like, they're often trauma-based disorders. And like, especially for me, like my father, 110% has some sort of undiagnosed personality disorder. I often, I used to sit and analyze my dad, because he was like, if anyone, I don't know if anyone reads my writing, but you know, they might do after this and they'll know what I'm talking about. I often credit him with being the source of this. He's the catalyst to the whole thing. And he is. Like, I wrote a story called The Boogeyman, and he was the boogeyman as a child. Like, he was everything that we all feared. He would abuse myself, my mother, my brothers, physically, emotionally, and later we found out in other ways as well, unfortunately. So he's the worst kind of human being like could exist. And all these traits that I grew up with and still carry, not all of them obviously, but you know, they came from him. I'd learned them from him, or maybe there was some sort of genetic component where I picked up some of it from him and he's sort of brought it out with the trauma. Like, you know, I'm confident it's probably a mixture of the two, to be honest. But I've dealt with these relationships, is my point. I've been in these toxic relationships. So, and I've probably not been the nicest person myself, you know, like, again, I'm not going to sugarcoat things and make out that people with ASPD or any cluster B disorders are easy people to live with, because most of the time we're not easy to live with. There's some things, you know, but when I say that, I don't mean that we're outwardly explosive or aggressive, you know. Like, I'll give you an example. And I've spoken about this before. So me and Emily, for example, because of the mental health disorders that she suffers with, she's more of an emotional person. You know, she needs that sort of emotional reassurance, and that tender, loving care, that, you know, that affection. Whereas myself, suffering with ASPD, one of the biggest things I suffer with is a lack of empathy. A lack of, you know, I have shallow emotions, shallow affect. I have dulled emotions. So I can't always share her pain. you know, and she knows this, like I can't feel what she's feeling. So, and even though I might not feel like heaps of empathy at that moment, that doesn't mean I can't act in a compassionate way. You know, that the two aren't necessarily linked. I can make and because I have a connection to her, I have a connection to this person, I'm consciously making a decision to be caring, and that will make our relationship stronger, regardless of whether I can fully understand or conceptualize that person's emotions or not. You know, I'm going to have to live with that. And she, you know, like, it's just something that I'm probably always going to have to deal with, but that doesn't mean I can't be compassionate as a person. And that doesn't mean I have to be deliberately nasty just because I don't understand how someone feels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the way that I think about this is I often see people talking about empathy as if they were saying that if you have empathy, if you can feel someone else's pain, automatically you can do no harm. And that is a blatant lie. And, you know, because there's a couple of things that I would say. First of all, I have seen some cluster Bs find a way of relating that seems to be similar to what you described, which is like, dude, I can calculate from experience the sorts of consequences certain types of behavior will have. It doesn't serve me or the person for me to act in this way. I don't have to feel what the person is feeling necessarily. I can choose to treat this person in this, you know, way that will preserve our relationship, that will be good for the both of us. And I think there's some pushback, like, well, if the person's not feeling it, then it's not real. And I'm like, on the contrary, because people are just built the way that they're built, you know. If you don't have empathy like some other people have empathy, what are you going to do about that? Snap your finger and you know, change the way that you're built, right?
Exactly.
So you can find ways to work in relationships with the way that you are. How is choosing to be good for yourself and the other person not a sign of love, not an act of love? How is something concrete not an act of love just because the person is built differently emotionally? That's the one thing. And I think on the other hand, it's like there are people who feel guilt, remorse, and empathy intensely, but they have dysregulated emotions. And so when they are well, they are very kind and loving, and, you know, they give you attention and all of that, but they don't know yet how to regulate their emotions. So when they are not well, they will destroy everything that they've built with you. And they'll feel guilt about it, and they'll feel remorse, and they'll feel, you know, empathy, they'll feel your pain, they'll feel all of it. But so long as they don't learn how to deal with those symptoms of theirs, regulating, you know, their emotions and stuff, they'll still be, so, you know, the person that's perceived as abusive, right? And that's going to hurt themselves, because essentially the person wants relationships of some sort, you know. So those are the two things I would say about empathy that I think people kind of don't understand. You know, it's not like, oh, I have empathy, automatically I can do no wrong.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that have caused problems for me, or people, you know, people who I've clashed with, maybe at like a university setting or a social setting, are all people who can experience empathy. So, you know, that's an example of what you just said. And, you know, it's an example of somebody who has empathy but has chosen to act malicious, you know, whereas I, in a relationship setting, have chosen to act in a respectful way, even if I don't understand or physically, emotionally relate to their emotion. And that's the thing that I think conceptualizes empathy. You know what I mean? And it's
Absolutely.
like, and like you said, it's, how is that not an act of love? Like I probably experience, I definitely experience love in a different way to most people, or you know, the average person, whatever that is. But that doesn't mean, just because it looks different, it doesn't mean it's bad. It's basically what I'm saying. You know, somebody's just said, you mean empath? Yeah,
exactly. The empaths, the supernova empaths.
That was funny.
The super duper supernova empaths.
Yeah. So what other questions do you have?
Yeah. Oh, and whenever you get tired, by the way, because there's a gazillion questions and we're going off on many useful tangents that are nice as well. So whenever you're hungry or you're sick of it or, you know, you want to log off, you let me know. But I'll ask you questions so long as you're willing to answer.
Ask away.
Okay. Yeah. Can you share a bit about homicidal ideation? How does this impact you and how do you deal with it? I think you've shared a little bit, but if you want to share anything else.
Yeah, so homicidal ideation, for those that don't know, is basically having ideas about homicide, basically, like thoughts about killing people. That's probably one of the most intense things that I've struggled with since, and those are the first symptoms, by the way, that I experienced as a kid. Those are the things I used to talk about when I was young to my teachers and stuff, because I didn't really understand why I was feeling those things, or why, like, they were there all the time. Like that was my almost, I said this to Emily recently. I was like, oh my God, I've worked it out. It's probably a defense mechanism. I'm always like psychoanalyzing myself. And I was like, every time somebody does something that I don't like, or every time somebody makes me feel a certain way, like, and like tries to make me feel inferior or something, those thoughts come. Like, I almost, it's like a flood. Like, you open the floodgates and it comes flying in like that. It's like I described this in another podcast. You know, The Shining, when the lift opens and the blood comes rushing out, like that. That's how I describe it. Like, it's just so quick, like those thoughts. And that's how my brain deals with things. It's like, right, you might not be physically stronger than this person. This goes back to when I was a kid. But if you killed them, it doesn't matter how strong they are because they're dead. And, you know, you have an edge on that person. You have an edge on that person, which is you can end a person's life and have no remorse. And my brain sort of makes me feel like that's a superpower. Like, you know, like if I was in the army, for example, which I did apply for, by the way, when I was 18. Like, if I was in the army and I was doing all these things, I'd be like a super soldier because I wouldn't register the emotion behind doing these things to people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's sort of a way that I've come up against any sort of harm in my life. Anytime I've had issues with somebody, relationship problems, or someone's made me feel inferior or like tried to belittle me in some way, which has happened throughout my entire life, my mind just, like, it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde. It you know, if you hear people talk about OCD, they talk about it being like literally a separate entity in their minds. It's kind of like that. Like, it's something else that says, this person's made you feel way. Imagine that smirk being wiped off their face when you end their life. You know what I mean? Like, it's, and it would fill my mind with all these physical, like, pictures. Like, I've got a very vivid mind. You know, I'd have dreams about it, like very movie style dreams, and I'd write them down the next morning, and I'd turn it into a story, and I'd be like, I have to get this out. I have to get this, like, out onto paper. I can't draw, by the way, so my next stage would be to write it down into some sort of story, and that's probably been like a concurrent theme throughout my years. Like, that's a symptom that stayed with me from the beginning to the end. But I still get that today, those thoughts, you know. But for anyone watching, I do have a page called Diary of the Disordered on Instagram, where I do share those stories. Not all of them, for obvious reasons, but most of them I do share online, if you know, so you can sort of see what I mean. And that's the way I can control those thoughts. People will probably see that content and think, my God, that's really violent. But yeah, it is. It's violent. It's meant to be violent, but I'm doing it in a way that is healthy, as opposed to doing it in real life. So, you know, I either write about it, or, you know, I go to prison, which is something that I experienced when I was a kid. You know, I was violent as a kid. I was homeless when I was 16, so I was experiencing a lot of things that, like, real problems in my life. So all those thoughts kind of bubbled over, and, you know, I got arrested for being violent and all those kinds of things. So, but nowadays I have my head screwed on a little bit better. And I can deal with it in a more healthy way. And I wouldn't be talking about it in this setting if it was a danger to people, because that would be very silly for me to come on and talk about it in such a public setting if I was going to do any of those things. But I've got so much control over it now, and I'm so happy to talk about it. because it's such a necessary part of my ASPD journey. And a lot of other people have messaged me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other people post about the same thing with ASPD. They talk about the exact same thing, but not a lot of people want to talk about it. So, yeah, that's homicidal ideation.
Yeah, I've read some of your writing, and I think there was one where a kid was homeless at 13. If I remember, I don't know if I remember the age correctly, and then he went to the park, and there was a cat, and there was all of that.
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, you talk about the homicidal ideation and the way that you describe, like, oh, you know, I would feel no remorse. I could go to the army and all of that. And I'm like, I've had obsessive homicidal thoughts since I was small. But the thing is, I feel tremendous guilt. So it's like I couldn't explore these things with any sort of pleasure. They were more like obsessive thoughts that I wish I didn't have.
Like intrusive.
But they kept coming. Yeah, exactly. There we go. Intrusive thoughts that I wish I didn't have. You know what I'm saying? But like throughout the entire day, for many years, there were many years of my life where it would take me from 1 to 4 hours to get out of bed, because as soon as I woke up, I would start imagining killing people. and I would just like be transfixed in that world, and I would get so angry, you know. And like I was paralyzed, but you know, I have the guilt, and I have the, oh, I want to be a good person, all of that. And so, and then I read about intrusive thoughts, and I'm like, oh, you're just supposed to look at them and be like, oh, they're thoughts. But you know, it does bring up themes of powerlessness and not wanting to follow rules that don't make any sense to me, and like a type of release for annihilating someone. You know what I'm saying? A type of release. Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely correct. But it's often a sort of it's an avenue that most don't want to go down, basically. So we've got questions coming in, and I've completely ignored them. I apologize. What are the steps you feel are necessary to overcome / control cluster B disorders? The steps I feel are necessary. I wouldn't say overcome, but control. Control is probably a better way of saying it. Or manage. Well, probably what I said earlier to you, which was about the martial arts, or it's finding a different way of dealing with the most dominating and aggressive symptoms. So, you know, anytime you are triggered, or you're coming up, or you're dealing with, like for me, it's homicidal ideation and aggression and you know, other sorts of like miserable symptoms, or usually to do with rage. For me, it's about controlling the rage. It's about managing it, but not controlling it to the point where I'm bottling it up, because obviously we all know that's not good for us. But to release it, but just in a different way. So martial arts was perfect for me, and writing is perfect for me. So that's how I would overcome my, the darker symptoms. But it's different for everybody else. You know, everyone's experience is too singular to themselves. Yeah, not suppress but control. Yeah, that's how I would do it anyway. So what other questions do you have for me? You've got loads. You've got some really good questions on that.
Tons. I've got tons of questions. Okay. Do you experience loneliness, or what's your relationship to loneliness as someone with ASPD?
Okay. So very simply, again, this goes back to the borderline traits as well, is I'm also quite asocial as well as antisocial. Obviously, for anyone watching, those two are different, by the way. I am quite asocial in the sense that I don't want to, I'm quite introverted in the sense that the way that my life is structured at the moment is as I work from home, and I now live in a city that I am unfamiliar with in terms of socializing, unless I'm going out to get drunk, which I try not to do as much anymore. especially now I've got into sport. But the borderline sense of me hates being alone. You know, the feeling of that nobody wants to be around me, nobody wants to be near me, or you know, again, it's the fear of abandonment in a way, isn't it? Like, you don't want to be around everybody all the time, but you don't want to be completely abandoned by everybody, or feel like you're inferior in any sort of way. So I feel like a lot of me wants to go out and socialize. I want to go and join some sort of club, you know, or go and sort of socialize in some sort of way, but I just don't trust anybody. That's where the ASPD kicks in. I don't trust you. I don't believe anything you're saying to me. I don't believe that you even like me. You know what I mean? Even though I'm putting on this charm and masking and mirroring you, essentially, you're basically talking to a version of you. I don't trust that either. So it's just like, I'm in a perpetual state. If I want to have friends, but I don't trust anybody. So it's a vicious cycle, and it's not nice, really. So how I cope with loneliness is I don't really. I just sort of have to get over that. I don't really have a long answer to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something a lot of people are still trying to figure out. How does, you talked about imposter syndrome. Do you want to say anything else about imposter syndrome? Or do you think you've said enough?
I think the only thing I would add for imposter syndrome is that when things are going good, your brain also almost tries to convince you that you don't have anything wrong with you anymore, and that you know, you're sort of making things up, or you've sort of dreamt everything. But even that in itself is disordered thinking, in my opinion. You know, like it's like your brain's trying to bully you and make you feel worse, even like more than it already has done. Do you know what I mean? But then I said this in a post as well, is that something will happen, something will trigger me, or I'll experience something that brings it all back. Like, you realize that you know, nothing's changed. You've just had a good streak for a little while. That's the only thing I'd add on that one. Okay.
What about, well, you told us what your experience with therapy has been like. Has there been anything positive in any moment ever, or is that not something you can say so far?
Well, I did post an update the other day. So I've finally been passed to some sort of talking therapy through the NHS. So I meet with them next week, and they're going to discuss whether it's going to be in person or over the phone, that kind of stuff. So I suppose I'm one step closer to getting therapy as an adult, with more of a, you know, a hold on how I am, and I can articulate it better. So we'll find out. I'll update you next week. Cool. When I find.
Okay, that'll be cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, this is something that we've kind of talked about, but let's see if there's anything else. Do you believe empathy is necessary to make wise choices in relationships? Anything else you want to say on that?
The answer to that question is no, I don't. And I don't think I have anything else to add. Just to reiterate that no empathy or a dulled sense of empathy doesn't mean that you can't be compassionate. That's sort of, I'd just round it up like that, really.
Sounds good. Okay. What's it like being in a relationship with someone else who is also personality disordered?
For me and Emily, it works quite well, believe it or not. So I mentioned how obviously she's more emotional than I, but that actually works to our advantage most of the time, because if she's like super anxious about something and super emotional, because I'm not elevated emotionally, it kind of sort of brings her down and balances her out when she realizes there's nothing really to be anxious about, because she can see that I'm not panicking about anything. Like sort of like when you're on an aeroplane and it's moving, but everyone else seems really calm, so you sort of calm down a little bit like that. Just sort of, you know, balances it out. And I've said this before in another post as well, but like, because I have so few connections, when I do establish a connection, I do feel strongly for that person. I do make an effort with that person because my connections are so few. I do make that effort when it's real. So I make an effort. I make a conscious effort with Emily. Like, you know, yeah, that's it really. Like, it works because I make an effort, and it works because she makes an effort. She understands me, I understand her, and we just work together. And it's as simple as that, really. Like, yeah, simple as that.
I think a lot of things in relationships are just about like, well, let's both always, you know, decide to make it work at the end of the day. Whatever it is that we're dealing with, let's just talk about it and make it work. I think a lot of big hurdles can be overcome just in that way. I
agree.
Do you experience lack of forethought? And if so, how does that affect your life?
I used to. When I was sort of experiencing the aggressive thoughts, or some of the physical things I'd done, like criminal things I'd done when I was younger, I would talk about them sort of with ease. Like I wasn't talking about them as if it was a problem. I was talking about it like, like I'm explaining what I've had for my breakfast, for example. It was just so easy to talk about, and people have reacted badly to that in the past. And that's, I didn't forethink in that sense what the outcome would be, because what I consider normal is not normal to most. But I've learned a lot better now. Like, I don't really do that as much anymore. I don't really struggle with it anymore. But and when I say younger, I don't mean like 10, 11 years old. I mean like 18, like, okay. Like maybe, yeah, about 10 years ago. So it's quite a long time ago, but it's, it's more recent than like 10 years old, for example. So yeah, I don't really struggle with it anymore, basically.
Okay. And I'm sorry, how old are you?
I'm 27 now. Turned 27 on the 29th. 27.
Yep. Oh, you turned 27 on the 29th. Right now. Like, oh, cool. Well, congratulations. Well, that's good. I guess the brain also changes, right? From 25 on. I don't know if that helps. Just like, well, let's be more mindful from now on. So there's that. I think you already answered this as well, but did you feel strange or different from childhood?
Yeah. What do you mean? As in, what do you mean by that?
Like what you said about, if you have a disorder, you're different. You feel that you're different because people react to you as if, right? Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I've always. I think I think for most people, or for me, when you go to school, and you see how people typically act in a social setting, and you realize that you just don't fit that. You're not fitting in with everybody else. You start to quickly realize something's not quite right. And for most of my childhood, up until I was like 18, and I still sort of think this way now. This hasn't really left. Is I always think the problem is everyone else. My brain makes me think, nah, it's them that's the problem. Like, I'm interesting as fuck, like, you screw you guys. But yeah, I've always known that there's something different. Even I struggle now though. I'm 27 years old, and I still struggle with social settings, like struggling what to say, how to talk to people. And if people don't react the way that I would assume that they would react, it really pisses me off as well. Like, you know what I mean? So I'm making an effort with you. Like, I'm masking super hard right now, and I'm making an effort with you, and you're boring the hell out of me. You're giving me nothing to work off, and you're more interested in this guy in the corner because he's better looking. It's like, yeah, but I'm actually trying to have a conversation with you here. I'm attempting to connect to you, and you don't understand how hard this is. And I think that's why I really struggle in social settings, and that's been the same since I was a kid. Like, that's just ran concurrently, and that's never changed even now. So yeah, I do feel different in that sense. So you just said something really interesting. You said, I'm trying to connect with you here, and you're paying attention to this other guy here. Is it because, I don't know if this makes sense. Do you feel that the way that you like to connect to people is actually deeper than most people.
Yes, and you know what? That's actually corroborated by my brother, who I live with. He brought a friend over. We were going on a night out drinking, and he brings his friend, and I'm having a nice conversation with his friend, just a normal talk. And he told my brother after this meet, he was like, "I really like Jake. He's really deep. He can talk about really deep. He can talk about anything." And I was like, yeah, because I don't like small talk. I don't want to talk about how, hello, you don't do that, because that's faker than what I do. Like, I just want to talk about deep stuff. I want to get to know you as a person. I want to get to know you quickly to find out whether you are worth my time, basically.
Seems pretty logical to me. I think people are insane if they don't think that way.
Yeah. I'm just a bit more... I just admit it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who feel like misfits in a way or different, they like to relate to people at a different level. And it just makes no sense to have certain types of interactions. And so you're like, why would I make this effort? This is boring, it sucks, and I get nothing out of it. And it's so much effort.
Yeah.
And like, if you can have a deeper relationship, and maybe that's all the person needed. Maybe that's all the person needed.
Maybe.
The right sort of.
Someone's just a really good question.
Oh,
cool.
Cool.
It was actually a little bit further up, so we've probably spoken quite further ahead. But somebody says, you mentioned traits of BPD. Do you experience these homicidal thoughts in response to fear of, in brackets, a perceived abandonment? So that's a really good question. Do you experience these homicidal thoughts in response to? Maybe. I suppose it's more like, I think in short, I suppose the answer is yes. Like, I think it's when somebody tries to like abandon me or not give me a chance at all, due to some, I just sort of, that's the way my brain reacts. Yeah, I would say probably yes, but it's not. Yeah, it's like, you're not giving me the time of day. You're not giving me the respect that I'm giving you. So I'm thinking about being really violent to you as a result. Yeah, so I suppose those two things are probably connected. Yeah, it's like, it's like a sort of cocktail, isn't it, of things going on at the same time. So I suppose yes is the answer to that. So that's a really good question.
That is, here in Brazil, people believe that you cannot have antisocial and borderline traits, because if in their minds, if you're antisocial, you can't also like have abandonment issues. And that's like, makes no sense.
Well,
why?
Yeah, but let's tell people why it doesn't make sense, because antisocial literally means against society. Somebody who doesn't have any care for the social norms. That's basically all that means. Is someone who is typically, it's used to describe violence, isn't it? Like violence against, like in society, we have a set of laws that we abide by, and we say, you shouldn't do this to people because it's nasty. We all need to get along. And when somebody goes, nah, screw that, and goes against that, and and is violent and aggressive and causes problems, and they fail to conform, they are antisocial. You can be antisocial and have friends. You can be antisocial and struggle with the fact that you don't have friends. Like, the brain is way more complex than you think. So yeah, to me it makes complete sense. But I can understand why people get confused. But at the end of the day, what people need to remember is that borderline and antisocial are in the same cluster. They overlap a lot. So it makes complete sense that they would overlap. And if not, some people share those same things. So yeah, just wanted to clear that up for people who may still think that. That's
a good way of clearing it up. I think there's a moral judgment where people think that if someone suffers and having needing to have connections or having a fear of abandonment is a type of suffering, that they can't be bad So those two things cannot be in the same category.
Yeah.
When it's like, that's not how, you know. In your specific situation, again, I think you answered this, but let's see if you have anything else to add. What do you attribute your ASPD to? Genetics, trauma, both?
Yeah, good. Again, great question. Both is the answer to that. So my dad definitely has a personality disorder. I suspect that it was ASPD, but a more severe version of it. When you look at a criteria of ASPD, he was probably the dictionary definition of, like, he just wasn't a nice person on any level. Like, and he almost constantly, he was almost constantly faking or being angry about something, you know, like when he was talking to women, for example, when he was trying to attract the opposite sex, he was so charming and he can turn it on so quickly, and he would come across as like really suave, you know, he was well dressed, he was well groomed, he was really, you know, he would listen to what they say, he'd laugh, he'd make them giggle, he'd make them feel special. And then as soon as he got them in a relationship, he switched and he was controlling and he was evil, not only mentally but physically abusive. And I used to watch that behavior as a kid and think, how do you do that? Like, how does that even happen, you know? So I think, you know, and if you anyone who researches like yourself, like the academics of personality disorders, some people do talk about a genetic trait, you know, passing on the genetic sort of side of things. So I think that if my dad did have something, which I'm 100% sure he did, he's probably passed that, you know, the predisposition on to me. And then funnily enough, he is the one that brought it out of me through trauma. So, you know, yeah, I would say a mixture of the two, basically.
That makes sense. Okay, again, a repetitive question, but what has helped you in your healing process the most?
The most would be my obsession with health. I think so during my sort of journey, I've discovered that I align with factor 1 psychopathy, which isn't exactly the same as ASPD, but it shares a lot of the same things. But basically, one of the symptoms or characteristics of factor 1 psychopathy is a sort of a grandiose sense of self, like a heightened, you know, wanting to be perfect, that perfectionism sort of thing, wanting to appear a certain way and have that charm, that superficial charm. They sort of go hand in hand. So me having an obsession with how I look, it's kind of fed into that, but it's kind of fed into it in a positive way, because I used to weigh like 135 kilograms. I don't know what that is in pounds for anyone who does that. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
And now I weigh like 95 kilograms. Yes. So that's like 20, I think like 20, I was like 25 stone at my heaviest. And then I went down to 23, and then I'm now like 14 or something, for anyone else who doesn't want to convert it. But that sort of fueled it even more. The changes that I saw physically fueled that sense of self-worth even more. And now I've just become obsessed with making myself look good, but feel good as well. So I've changed the way I eat. I don't really eat processed foods anymore as much as possible. You know, like, it's a good change. It's a good obsession. I think that's probably the best thing that's come out of this in response to that, is I'm just my health. I'm more obsessed about health in a positive way, I would say. So that's probably the best way I can answer that.
Okay, are you generally obsessed about things? Would you say you're intense with regards to pretty much everything you do? Is that like an aspect of how you function?
I would say yes. I'm very, I do get obsessed with things. And then I go through periods of like anhedonia as well, and just like fall in love with things. Like I did strongman for years, and I put everything into it. And then one day I just fell out of love with it completely. And I've never been. But I think I've always been interested in health, but just in a different way. Like when I was a strong man, I did it because I wanted to be big, scary, and strong, you know. But I got strong, but I just got really fat. But I've changed it in a different way now. So my mentality's changed with my weight, but it's changed with my personality disorder as well. Like it's like it evolves. Like my personality disorder changes over the years. It evolves. Certain symptoms take a back seat. Like my impulsivity has taken a back seat. And then other symptoms have come to the forefront. So things like I've become more shallow in my emotions as I've grown up than when I was younger. And when I was younger, I was more emotional about not having friends and stuff, you know. But now, like, more aggressively shut off from that kind of thing, and I'm more sort of like honed in on, you know, this. I don't care about anybody else. This is what I want to do, you know, and it's. So yeah, it's sort of developed over the years, that actually, and it's quite interesting actually.
Yeah, they say that some research says that antisocial borderline may, for some people, change over time, right?
Yeah.
In different ways, and that's always interesting to observe as well. The things that just happen, even without like treatment or anything like that, you know. What are the most difficult issues for you about being in a relationship?
I think at the beginning of the relationship, and I say I'm talking about this relationship. My previous relationships, I've had a lot of problems. Like I actually dated somebody who had borderline, another person, it's completely separate. But they were like textbook borderline. That's what I say to make it easy for people to understand. Like they had outbursts out of nowhere. They were physically aggressive and violent. You know what you typically associate, like those outbursts of explosive emotions when they thought things, you know, you were going to abandon them. That you know, that person and me did not get along. Like that person, there's many occasions where I had to leave the situation before anything physical, because this person was like in my face, like up in my grill. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I can't be around this person, and I quickly felt no emotion for that person, like very quickly. I was with this person for a year, and any emotion that I may have felt for that person disappeared like almost overnight. You know, so but with this relationship, because it's different, and because I know it feels different, I make more of an effort with it. So I don't really struggle anymore in this relationship. But at the beginning, I think Emily, it's fair to say, didn't understand ASPD, didn't know what it was, so probably didn't understand why I came across so like unbothered emotionally. Probably just thought I didn't care. But it was obviously a little bit more complex than that. But she understands that now, so we don't really struggle anymore, basically.
Yeah, it's so much more useful when there is content, you know, like lots of people don't understand BSPD, you know, or other disorders and stuff. And when, like I said, when you look it up, you just get certain types of information that are generalized things. And so it sucks because there's a cultural issue, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Nowadays, can you experience regret or remorse for past choices? Is this necessary for you to choose better behavior?
No. So the things that I have done in my past, obviously not all of it I'm allowed to say, but all the things I have done in my life, I have no remorse for them. I don't regret them. In times of like in times where I've had really bad problems in my life, I probably crave some of those behaviors. But I don't think that it's necessary. I don't think regret is necessary for anything. Like, if I've never really felt regret, then, you know, it's not going to play a part in my life down the line. You know, it's never played a part in my life, regret. So it doesn't make a difference is the answer to that. Like, you know, I experience cognitive empathy, as in like I can understand why people may feel a certain way, which is probably why my relationship works now. But the effective emotional empathy is something I've never experienced. So the regret, you know, I don't feel regret. I probably never will feel regret, but I don't feel like it's necessary to be a good person. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can make a decision and not feel bad about it, and that decision be a good thing as well. Like, you know, I can hold the door open. I can hold the door open for somebody, which is a good thing objectively, but it might not register emotionally in any way for me. Like, it doesn't matter to me. But it was objectively a good thing to do. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it doesn't really matter to me. Basically, nothing's changed on that front. Basically,
you can just choose the behavior regardless of that not having that specific emotion present. What is your biggest motivation for change, for you know, working on yourself?
My biggest motivation for change, quite simply, is when I got arrested, I realized that I didn't want to be in a cell. Like, I was sat in a physical cell, and I was like, with the things that I want to do with my life, with the things that I've become obsessed with, I physically won't have access to those things if I continue down this path. So it's not like I don't think about those things, and, you know, those illegal behaviors, or like, we all, you know, a lot of us crave violence at times anyway. But I just understand that it's not conducive to a good future. And if I want a relationship, which obviously I've got, if I do want friends in the future, you know, maybe I'll meet some good friends. I've met some really good friends on the internet, like, who cluster B people, but just not in real life, unfortunately. But, you know, that may change, and you can't do that sat in a prison cell. So that is my main thing. Like, and it's also like it comes in with the health thing as well, like the health obsession. Like, if I can conquer my mental health and I can conquer my physical health, then I'm fully in control. And that's something I've never had as a child, being in control. So now I can be in control in a positive way. So that's it, really. Is there a flip side to that, being obsessive about your health? Is there at any point at which that becomes like, this is not balanced, you know, take it down a notch or something like that? Yes, but it's more like, so I experience sort of like, I experience health anxiety as well, which I think is what comes along with the obsession, which is another misconception. People think that people with ASPD can't feel anxiety or fear. That's rubbish, by the way, guys. Rubbish. Studies have actually shown that people with ASPD are more likely to have comorbidities of things like general anxiety disorder and substance abuse disorder, which can cause anxiety as well. I've struggled with substances when I was younger and things like that. I wasn't an addict, by the way. I just drank a lot and did a load of drugs when I was younger. So that probably didn't help with the anxiety. Yeah, what was we saying? My mind's just gone blank. That happens. Tangents, right? Oh, damn, I don't know, because we were at one question, but then you went off on an interesting tangent. Now I don't remember. Oh, yeah. How to get back to that. Well, basically... anxiety, yeah. Is that what you were saying? It was health anxiety that we were talking about. Okay, there we go. The downside to being obsessed about health is that... There we go. Yes. That's all I was trying to say. Okay, now I get the answer to the question. Yeah, I guess when you're naturally obsessive about things, it can go... Yeah, it can go both ways. Right. You have to control it, as you say. Did you understand the impact of your behavior before? Like, before that, being in the cell and be like, this is no good? Yeah, I just didn't care. Like, I understood that the people that I did harm, I just didn't care. You know what I mean? Like, in my mind, it was justified. They weren't particularly nice people anyway. You know, they'd constantly talk about other people. They were constantly nasty about other people. You know, they were nasty about me, and unfortunately for them, I was the one that reacted to it. You know, as simple as that, really. Like, I don't really believe in good and evil as a concept. So, like, I just believe if you're nasty to me, and I'm nasty back, it's your own fault. Simple as that. So, you know, it doesn't really register in my mind, if that makes sense.
Okay. What range of emotions, actually, you kind of answered that as well, but what range of emotions do you feel nowadays versus what you used to feel when you were younger?
When I was younger, I was way more emotional. Like when I was developing, I used to cry a lot when I was younger. But that was when I was in the midst of like physical violence and things like that. Because I've had 2 father figures, both of them violent. And when I was with the second father figure, I was at school, so I had bad peers and I had bad parents. Well, parent. So yeah, I was really emotional back then. But as I've grown up, I've become less emotional and I've become more shallow with my emotions and probably less empathetic than I ever was. But that's the only noticeable change emotionally.
Do you think that that process was completely spontaneous, or do you think you made certain decisions and worked towards that?
I think it was sort of the natural course of things. Like you spend your life, you know, sort of trying to pander to people to try and, you know, you spend a lot of your childhood lonely and people bullying you. So you sort of think there's something wrong with you. And obviously your family bullying you as well. So you think there's something wrong with you. So you make the effort to try and establish a friendship, even though you don't really feel like you want to. So I think the natural progression eventually is to think, I don't care, and I don't owe these people anything. You know, why do you want to be friends with people like that anyway? And why do you want the opportunity to let those people back in? Or, you know, so it became, it's like I didn't really have my defenses up that much, but now I really do. I think it's just a natural course of things, really. So I think I don't think it was spontaneous. I think it was more of like a natural progression that was always going to happen.
Okay. Is there anything you wish people knew about ASPD?
Yes. I wish people understood that people with ASPD, you know, they're not Patrick Bateman, they're not Ted Bundy, they're not Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, you know, there's people who aren't in prison that have ASPD. You know, there's people who haven't necessarily been physically violent to other people who have ASPD. There's people who haven't abused people who have, you know, there's people who have abused people that don't have ASPD, etc. Bottom line is, not everyone with ASPD are monsters and are inherently violent. So, you know, a lot of us are just bored. We're just bored people with not a lot of emotion. That's pretty much it, really. So I think have an open mind and be able to critically think about things. So if somebody says something like, oh, ASPD people are like this, be able to critically think and evaluate that statement. So look at both sides, basically, as anyone would when you're researching things. Have two sides to the story.
And watching many people talk about the same subject, but people who actually have the disorders, you can see how different they are amongst themselves. And then you're like, well, I feel like a fool for generalizing.
Well, exactly.
Because it's such a wide spectrum.
Exactly. It's too diverse to put into a little box.
And what message would you give to younger people with ASPD?
My message would be to become as self-aware as possible, to avoid any disappointment later on in life, and also sort of by piggybacking off the other thing is you're not inherently abusive or a monster just because you feel this way. Like, having negative thoughts, no matter how aggressive or violent they are, thoughts are just thoughts. Unless they become action, don't worry about it. But also, don't be afraid to go and talk to somebody. Like, if you'll see a lot of people online talk about you being a monster or aggressive, but like, that doesn't matter. Like, that's going to probably always exist, unfortunately. Just understand that that's not the case, and that if you want to go and talk to somebody about it, do that. It makes a huge difference. Trust me.
Yeah, excellent advice. And yes, thoughts are just thoughts. Like, advice literally for all of humanity.
Yeah.
All of us.
Exactly.
Jake, thank you so much for answering all of the questions. Thank you, Emily, if you're there. I don't know if you're there. I think this was very, very enlightening. You know, I guarantee you, we have few viewers now because lots of my followers don't speak English, so they're waiting for the translations. But
That's
you know, I've had many people get in touch and say, "Oh, I think it's really cool that you're going to interview Jake tomorrow because my friend has antisocial personality disorder. I have antisocial personality disorder." So it's already being welcomed, and I knew it would be, you know, because things are changing very slowly here in Brazil. So I'm excited to post that. And is there anything, Emily, or you want to say anything else, anything you want to tell us about where we can find you, upcoming projects, whatever you want to say?
Okay, Emily, do you want to say anything? Emily's in there painting. She's coming.
Cool. Emily's an artist.
Yes, yeah.
Hello, Emily.
You want to say?
Film coming out shortly, haven't we? From that monologue that you did. Is it the Boogeyman one?
Yeah. So the story, the Boogeyman that I mentioned earlier, he's turned that into.
Okay.
So that's coming out as a short film soon. So you can find that on Antisocial. That'll be on our page, Antisocial Theatre on Instagram. We're also on TikTok and YouTube, the exact same username. We're going to be making a lot of face-to-video content. Is there anything else?
It's just the face-to-video content we've been doing, isn't it?
We've changed the content basically. So it's
get our face out more. Yeah,
that's it really. We want to speak.
I thought that was awesome.
The connection's going a bit there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it really.
Okay. Can you also tell us some of the podcasts and stuff that you've been on so we know where to find more content with you guys in it?
Yep. So we were on a podcast recently called Your Dose. We were on a podcast called, was it Bunny Hugs podcast? Yep. And we were also on a podcast called the Rainy Days podcast as well. So that's the most recent ones that we've been on. Did you hear that?
Sorry, the connection. Something about rainy days, and that's literally all I heard. could you repeat?
Yep.
Wait, hold up. Let me change the internet real quick. Just give me 1 second. I know we're towards the end, but I want to be able to hear this. Hold up.
Sorry.
Okay. Now I think it's better now. Please repeat that.
So, one of the first podcasts we went on was the Rainy Days podcast, which he's actually just joined. Hi, Jason.
Cool.
The Rainy Days podcast. Then we were on the Bunny Hugs podcast, and then most recently we went on to Your Dose. That's a podcast as well. That's just a fairly new one. So they're the most recent ones. Okay,
that's what I wanted to know. I knew you guys had been on podcasts, but I didn't know which ones. Anything else, Emily? No?
No.
Guys, thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm very glad that we did this. Thank you so much. Can't wait to get it translated and uploaded. This was awesome. Keep doing your awesome work.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Cheers.
Bye-bye.